Good morning, everybody. We'll start with the first slide. So this is Saadia Gaon. I mean, it's not really Saadia Gaon, but this is supposed to be Saadia Gaon. And I wrote on top the way you would pronounce it, Saadia Gaon, but on the bottom is it how everybody spells it, Saadia. So he lived the end of the 9th and mostly during the 10th century. So it's still quite a while ago, I would say, more than 1,000 years ago. And but he's later than the ones we talked about before. He's later than Yanai and then Kalir. And no, not really as Shifatya and Amitai, that they were either around the same time or a bit later than him. But so his Arabic name, because he was his native language was Arabic. He was born and grew up in Egypt. Sa'id ibn Yusuf al-Fayyumi. From al-Fayyumi means from the Fayyum. And the Fayyum is a region, but it's also a city in Egypt. Currently, a place where a lot of Christians live. The Christian minority is, a lot of them are, well, traditionally in Egypt, that was like where a lot of minorities grew up. There's not many Jews anymore, but in those times, there were both. Abigail, do you want to say something? Yeah, you're muted. So I'd just let you know. Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is Saeed mean happy in Arabic?
Yeah,
Is that
in
what his name
Arabic,
is?
that's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
but Saadia, Saad in Hebrew means helping. So Saadia, God has helped.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So or sustained. Mis'ada, it's the same root. Means is a restaurant. It's where you're sustained, basically. So that's that. So it's the same letters of the root, and many times you see in Arabic that and in Hebrew, often the roots, the meaning of the root were of the Hebrew and Arabic, Semitic languages. Most of the words can be the core meaning of the word can be found if you go back to 3 root letters, and in this case it's Samach Ayin Dalet, Saad, and so these occur both in Hebrew and in Arabic, and in many cases you see that the meaning of these root letters are related but not exactly the same. So if you're very sustained, you're quite happy, you're comfortable. So I guess that's what happy, how they're related. It's actually quite sometimes funny, because the word hamd in Arabic means to praise. Like Muhammad is the one who's praiseworthy. Alhamdulillah means praise to God. It's like an equivalent of the Hebrew Baruch Hashem, where people say, how are you doing? Baruch Hashem. In Arabic, they would say, Alhamdulillah. So if they're really good, they say, if it's really good, you say, how are you doing? Alhamdulillah, Baruch Hashem. But if you're not so good, you say, Baruch Hashem, Alhamdulillah. So on the tone, you just know if you're doing well or not. But the answer is usually the same. So hamd occurs in Hebrew too. This is a total segue, by the way, but it's okay. So lo tahmod beit re'echa, do not crave or covet the house of your neighbor. So it means craving or coveting or something that is desiring or desirable. These roots, but praise in Arabic. So yeah, if somebody is very desirable, you might praise it. Oh, what a nice coat, what a nice jewelry. So you're craving it because it's desirable. So there is, of course, a relationship in the meaning, but it doesn't mean the same. So for instance, this is, I find it kind of funny, but in Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs, it talks about delicious foods that are not forbidden fruits necessarily, but fruits that are very delicate, and it's called mahmaddim, so the things that are desirable. But Muslims sometimes want to prove or show that Muhammad is is described and predicted in the Hebrew Bible. So they say, Muhammadim. It means this is a reference to Muhammad. Of course, it's very only you can only say that if you know nothing about the Hebrew language, but so it's not necessarily that the same word occurs that it also means the same. I'm sorry, it's a very long answer to a very simple question. But Sa'id does mean happy, but in Hebrew, Saadia means Yah, meaning the Lord, God, Hashem, has sustained. The son of Joseph, the Fayumite, from the Fayum. Now in Hebrew, for those who can read Hebrew, I think the majority probably to some extent, Pitomi. We're going to look at that later, right? Why not Fayumi, Pitomi? I'm going to address that very soon. I'll go to another slide here. So he's born in the Fayum in 882. There's a picture of the Fayum. You see, Fayum is one of the most fertile places in Egypt. It's really very pretty and very green. And so, according to Jewish tradition, I'm reading this, right? The Fayum was the same location as Pitom. So the F and the P are the same letters. Fayum, Payum, Pitom was a town mentioned in the Bible, one of the two cities that are mentioned that the Hebrew slaves had to build for Pharaoh. So they had the Pitom and Ramses. Nowadays, the historians and Egyptologists do not believe that it's the same, but Saadia believed it. That's why in Hebrew he calls himself Hapitomi, the Pitomite from Pitom, instead of, and as a translation for the word Fayum. Okay, so that clears that up. Why he calls himself Hapitomi, the Pitomite, instead of the Fayumite. Now, Saadia, a remarkable person, in many ways, positive and negative sometimes. Don't know if we're going to, how much I will talk about it. It depends on how this class goes. Just let me just say a few things I had announced that I wanted to go into this, into Saadia Gaon's poetry. I thought, you know what, I have some material. Well, I'll put this together for next class, not knowing that it's actually very involved. And it was much, much more work to prepare than I really had thought. And I'm definitely, I wish I had another week, because maybe this is about one poem. And it's so deep and intricate that in my feeling, I wish I could prepare more and explain more and look up more about it. So this is a disclaimer. I haven't really done as much as I wanted, but you know what? Maybe it's good, because maybe if it would go too deep, it would become tedious and boring. I don't know. Could be. So, but we'll see how it goes. And I'm not really sure how this goes. I never taught this before. So if you teach something a few times, you have more of an idea what to expect. But we can always talk a bit more about Saadia after, because he wrote this poem when he was about 20 years old. So we can always talk a bit more how his life evolved after that, which is interesting too, because he was quite a character. But so he wrote a bunch of things when he was about 20 years old. And 20, I mean, what do people generally do when they're 20, right? I mean, you have these exceptional people who are very young and very, very bright and smart and very studious, but in combination also very secure of themselves and very opinionated. That is not always a pleasant characteristic to deal with in people, but those are people who really rock the boat and make and stir up things, and they make history interesting. And he was one of these people. So when he was 20 years old, around, he wrote 2 Hebrew dictionaries. I mean, that's before laptops and word processors and anything. So it's all from mean, it's just amazing. Not so much what we expect about a dictionary, that you have a list of words with what it means. That would probably take a lot more time, but this is still pretty amazing. He wrote a dictionary, just all the words in alphabetical order. It's very hard without a computer, so I don't know how he did that, because you have to rewrite a lot, maybe. Or he worked with cards and then put it in order, then wrote it down. I have no idea. Just can only imagine. You can't even correct typos. It's all by quill. You know what I'm saying? Like a original pen with ink, but he did that. So it must have been a huge work. And then he made, and that is even more interesting and more unusual. He wrote another dictionary, not by the first word, how you look up words normally in a dictionary, but by the last letter of the word. And so that was a tool for poets. If you look up everything that ends with tet, so we're going to see that actually, but so or anything that ends with ma. So you can look all the words up that end with ma, and there are quite a few, of course. So a poet that wants to find a rhyming word can go to that word and look at other words that rhyme the same way. So why did he do that? Clearly, he was interested in poetry at a very young age. And in one of the future soon, I hope, we're going to talk about Arabic poetry, because Arabic poetry became like a template for Hebrew poetry, and Hebrew poetry started changing at a certain point. And I think very shortly after, or maybe already during Saadia Gaon's time, the format of Hebrew poetry started to look more and more like Arabic poetry in a number of aspects, and I'll go deeper into that, but just not in this class. And it's that's very very interesting to see, and in what ways. So Arabic had become, after the conquest of the Muslims of a large chunk of the world, and also Egypt, where he lived, and later he would live in Iraq. In large part of the world, Arabic had become the common language, the language of the dominant language. And so even minorities switched very rapidly to Arabic in most places. There were still, of course, minority languages persisted, but before Islam, Jews had used largely made use of Aramaic, and Aramaic is a Semitic language. It's related to Hebrew, just like Arabic is related to Hebrew, not in a different way, of course. But so the switch. So the Jews were already not generally speaking Hebrew. They wrote in it, and they could read it because it's what they grew up with, but it's not their spoken language at this point. So, but they were making use of Aramaic, a somewhat related language, also a Semitic language. And when Arabic had taken over, the switch was easily made to Arabic, to another substitute language for Hebrew. But the love for Hebrew was still there. But what's really interesting, the Arabic culture, the Arabs, when they conquered that part of the world, they had no prose. They didn't write in prose. They just had poetry. And the Arabic alphabet before Islam wasn't sufficiently evolved to really write things down exactly. So you had some letters, but a lot of letters looked the same. In Hebrew, you had the shin and the sin look the same, but that's basically it. But in Arabic, a bet and a nun and a yud and a tav could all had the same shape. So it's very hard to read any word. It's just only if you know it. If you know the word and you see the sign, you're like, oh, this is probably it. But so after Arabic came and the Quran was written down, it became very soon clear that that there was a need to further develop Arabic. And so then the letters were differentiated from each other by certain signs. So you could see the difference between these letters that before looked the same. So people started to write things down. But before that, all that poetry and long poems were all done by heart. So the Arabs had a tradition of talking, sitting by the campfire as Bedouins and reciting long poems, and that was normal. And when Islam came, in the beginning, people recited the Quran by heart too, because that was their tradition. It was not so weird to memorize long pieces of text by heart. Okay, so poetry was like the culture of the Arabs and was highly appreciated. And so that's the culture. That's what the zeitgeist in English. That's what the trend of the time is how I translate that word. Is the mode, the fashion, what everybody values. Of course, the minorities are also going to value poetry, and the Jews also started appreciating poetry. And they said, but look, Arabic, we hear it's beautiful. But we have a holy language of our own. We have our own holy language, and that is special. And they knew the text. And what's interesting, much more than later, much more than now. Jews also memorized large part of the scripture, not the Torah, the Psalms for sure. Also, the prophets. Like there is actually a place that comes to mind in the Talmud. And so it's not about memorizing texts, but it shows a little, it opens the door a bit to another time. And it between the lines, that part will inform us how teaching used to happen. And it shows us that was much more focused on memorizing text. For instance, let's say you need to, there's like a text in the Talmud, and it's not something people have to follow. It's Agadah, but Agadah means it's not law. So anything that is not law in the Talmud is just interesting information, suggestions, peeks into the past, all kind of things. It's not a law. It's a suggestion that somebody made. Okay, let's say you want to, you're in the crossroad in your life and you don't know what to do. And you want like an oracle. You would like to know. You would like to go to a prophet and ask him, what does God want me to do? So there are no prophets. So what do? This is like a suggestion in the Talmud by one of the rabbis at least. He says, you stop a child on the street and you say, what did you learn today? And then he's going to recite a text. And in the text, there's a clue of what you can do. So I wouldn't stop little Jewish children on the street and say, what did you learn? Because they're not going to recite the text. We're not focusing on memorizing text now. But in those days, from this quote, you actually understand that people really that it was a lot focused on memorizing text. And we're going to see from the poem that we're discussing, that we're going to discuss, we're going to see that it has to be that Saadia Gaon must have memorized a lot. And that helps his dictionary. Now, he wrote more than that. Now, let's go to the next slide. Maybe Vivian, would you like to read this slide?
We know that from an early age, Saadia was very interested in poetry, even though not much of his poetry has survived. In his dictionaries, he presents biblical Hebrew in a new application, adapting it to be used in contemporary and future poetry.
Now, also interesting, before we saw poetry and the previous classes, it was all liturgical poetry. Now, Saadia Gaon, I'm not sure if he wrote liturgical poetry. I think he might have, but I don't know of any. But what is interesting, he's presenting words in his dictionaries that can be used not only also for religious poetry, The poem we're going to look at is in some way religious poetry, but not liturgical. It's not to be read in any service. It has a religious connotation. But more than that, he paved the way for Hebrew poetry, but with secular contents. So, like Arabs do, the Arabic poetry before Islam was not religious. It was about love. It was about war. It was about death. It was about wine. It was about all kind of stuff, even non-kosher stuff. Like it's the language that is really mesmerizing, I'd say, for Arab speakers, and in this case, for Hebrew speakers. So here, this is part of he paved the way for a secular Hebrew poetry. We're going to see plenty of that in following classes. And we'll do another slide, please, Vivian.
This parallels the same phenomenon in Arabic and is no doubt inspired by it. Arabs see the language of the Quran as the purest form of Arabic, and poetry written in that idiom is celebrated and highly popular. Saadia wanted to show that classical Hebrew had the same poetic beauty and capacities.
Right, and that is an aim of the Hebrew poets from his day on. It's not just for prayer. It's really, and that's a big shift that happens around the time of Saadia Gaon. Before we saw Khalil and Yanai writing to embellish poetry, to embellish the service, but now he's just going to say the thought that's behind Saadia's poets and poetry, and after Saadia is the Hebrew language is special in itself, even if it's not used for prayer. So it's about all kind of things. Let me just ask David. It's very just going to go very maybe read this slide for me, David, Susan.
Okay, at the age of 23, he wrote a polemic work against a Karaite entitled Essa Meshali.
Very good.
Let me take up my discourse.
Yeah, Essa Meshali, 23 years old. So this, if I may just ponder a bit on this, 23 years old. There's a movement. There's an alternative kind of Judaism besides rabbinic Judaism that most people follow, especially today. But at those days, there's another movement that's quite powerful. It still exists in our days, by the way, but it's rather marginal, although that is somewhat on the growing. But in Israel, people turned against rabbinic Judaism for some understandable reasons, maybe because maybe don't like how it works currently. But in those days, the Karaite community was really strong and quite, let's say, missionary. They were actively trying to persuade people away from rabbinic Judaism to Karaite Judaism. Now, what is Karaite Judaism? Karaite Judaism means that Karaite Judaism is a type of Judaism that believes in God exactly the same way we do, believes in the Torah and all the prophets and the Psalms. They are actually Jews from their ancestry is Jewish. So they are accepted as Jews by all other Jews. The only difference is they do not believe in what we call the oral Torah, the oral law, the rabbinic law, so to say. So they would only have the written text, and they would reject Mishnah, Talmud, the authority of the rabbis to make decisions. Everything has to be found in Scripture. We can talk about that. I don't think we should go too deep into it, but that would be a whole class on its own, by itself. But so at a time when people are let's say today, the rabbinate is putting impositions on people, and people don't see the real good reasons behind it, then you could think that people say, I've done with all this rabbinical stuff. Oh, we have a Judaism that doesn't believe in rabbis. It's only the Torah. Wouldn't that be so much easier if you don't have all these rabbinical laws that are made? Well, it sounds like easier. It's not always easier, but that's besides the point. In those days, it had an attraction, a big attraction, and it was seen by leading rabbis as a serious competition for rabbinic Judaism. So, 23 years old, and he has the audacity to say, you know what, I'm going to solve this. I'm going to write against the Karaites, and we're going to deal with that danger and get rid of it once and for all. That was Saadia Gaon when he was young. He thought he could just solve a problem. And as a young whippersnapper, put his 5 cents in and just tell the world what everything is all about, and tell people if they're wrong or right. And that's Saadia Gaon. Saadia Gaon. But he wasn't called Gaon yet. Saadia, or Said, the son of Joseph, was had no problems with telling what he thought about things, and he did that. So yeah, maybe continue one more slide, David.
At the end of Essa Mishali, Saadia presents a poem, Telóf, Tèlef, of which a large section is preserved. The poem follows the Hebrew alphabet. The first strophe is centered around the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, the second strophe around the second letter, Bet, and so on.
Yeah, actually, not entirely correct. I should probably correct this. The first strophe starts with the Tav, with the last letter of the alphabet, and then it goes to Aleph, Bet, Gimel. So it goes from the first to the last letter, but it starts also with the last letter. So the last letter is used twice. What do I mean it's used twice? Before we go, this is the last slide before we look at the poem. If you don't mind reading this too, and then I won't bother you again, David, after that.
Every strophe has 4 lines. Each line consists of 2 units, so 8 units in total. Each line begins and ends with the central letter of that specific strophe. Each unit has the same rhyme, except the very last unit, which rhymes with all of the units.
Right. So we're going to see what that means, because it sounds maybe a bit abstract here. Not looking at examples, we're going to go through the idea is to go through the whole poem. Let's say 4 lines, and each line is 2 units, and they all rhyme with each other, but let's say, all right, let me just give one example here. Let's read this. Geda'um. So this is the letter Gimel. Start with the Gi. So all the Gimels that play a role are read here. See, so all the 4 lines have a Gimel at the end. It's 2 Gimels at the end. Gig, right? Gig. So, Do'im va'aso gig. Nikef hagim lehogeg. Galushu me'afim lemogeg, batsim sayadim ledogeg, garas kol ogeg, l'shem ashir rogeg, so ogeg, geg, galafahu hatzad kol sogeg, but on the last one, kol ila ushhita, and that ta is the end of every last, the end of every strophe ends with ta, or usually atta. Actually, but see, it's not just that he uses the beginning and the end of every letter. The end actually usually has the same letter double at the end, which is impressive to do that to find enough letters. But he had his own dictionary made for poets, so he used his own dictionary too. All right, now we'll go now. As I said, the first strophe starts with a tav, but you see there is dots and stuff. So unfortunately, fortunately, we found this poem, most of it in the Cairo Geniza. Yeah, that's lovely, because that Cairo Geniza turned out to be a treasure trove of documents you wouldn't have had with so much. We wouldn't have so much less materials without it. So the first one starts with a tav, but the downside of the Cairo Geniza is that it's not all really well preserved. It was just dumped in a corner, you know. So ... and all these brackets, these are places where the paper has deteriorated. So this one, the first one, we don't have. There are missing places. So Telóf Tèlef ha'otet kibrat ... We don't know, but we know it ends with tet because that's every unit of that ends with tet, right? And then tehi, they figured out that it had to be tehi, although that's missing. Geforet lefotet, and then again tet. Tahrach, probably yusotet, and then there's also a word in the middle we missing. Bitekach regen mehotet. Tunubach yeshotet. La ros lelotet, and then something ending with ta. So this is a bit puzzling, but we're going to look at this first strophe. What does it mean? Because this poem has a lot of unusual words, unusual terminology, basically, so it's not easy to understand. So this is let's look here. Telóf Tèlef ha'otet. So what is blue is what we're talking about. So I have different slides here. Can you see this? Is this shared sufficiently? You can see the new share? Yeah. Telóf Tèlef. So Telóf is an imperative. It means to arm yourself. And the word Tèlef means weaponry. So that is that's what it is. Now we can go. So the first this word means arm yourself, Telóf Tèlef. The second one would be ha'otet, scribe. But is that a usual word? Look, I'm not proficient in Hebrew. I'm not a native speaker for sure, and my Hebrew is definitely not. Could use a lot of improvement. So maybe it's a normal word, but I don't know for sure. But the people who have looked at it said that it means scribe. Now, ha, the first letter with the vowel ha, is often an article meaning the. You could say ha'otet means the scribe, but ha also is what they call in linguistics a vocative, which means o. So if you say hamelech could mean the king, but hamelech also means o king. So ha'otet could mean the scribe. But of course, arm yourself with weaponry. The scribe, that you wouldn't say that. Maybe in Portuguese, like you could actually, you explain. You say "o senhor," which is mean sir, but literally means the sir. But so it's similar in Hebrew. So here, ha means the. That means o, or it's like you're addressing somebody. And otet would be scribe, and it comes from the word od. An od means different things. Od means a miracle, means a sign also. Tie it as a sign on your hand. But od also means a letter. So otiot are letters. So ha'otet is somebody who scribbles letters, and scribble and scribe. There we go. So Telóf Tèlef ha'otet. Arm yourself with weaponry or scribe. And what are the weapons that the scribe has to arm himself with? Language. And this is about using language. This is about, this is a poem about poetry. Now, it comes to mind that I haven't sufficiently brought this up, but Saadia Gaon has a few goals with this. It seems that with this work, Saadia had several goals. First, he wants to retaliate against an attack from a Karaite by the name of Ben Asher, which at the time was a very common known family name among Karaites. Ben Asher, who himself had written a poem against rabbinic Judaism in general, but also specifically against Saadia. People say that this Ben Asher had actually provoked Saadia in retaliating with his own poem. Okay, so that's he actually in his work, not just in the poem, but in the book, he actually addresses Ben Asher. Secondly, he wants to present in this poem an alphabetic lexicon, an alphabetic, let's say, vocabulary, and using poetic terms, showing the rhyme, alliteration. Also, it's like a showcase what you can do with Hebrew in terms of poetry. Saadia uses much biblical Hebrew, but also language which biblical Hebrew is what the Karaite would have done, this Ben Asher would have done, because Karaites, even possibly more than Rabbinite, is called Rabbinic Jews, as Saadia is. So we talk about Karaites, and Rabbinic Jews are called Rabbinites in this context. The Karaites would not study Talmud, and they would study Bible. So their mastery of the Hebrew language based on biblical Hebrew is definitely not any less than Saadia's. So, but he also uses biblical Hebrew, of course, but also uses language from the Talmud, which the Karaites would not do, and also from earlier poets. He uses language from Yanai and Kalir and others. Yosef ben Yosef was one that was very celebrated, and he mentions like 4 or 5 poets in his poetry. These are 3 of them. There's 2 more, and they're all, by the way, part of what we call Palestinian Judaism. As I explained before, it was Palestinian Judaism, the Judaism of the land of Israel, that started really with using poetry and embellishing prayers with poetry, in contradiction to Babylonian Judaism. They were not so fond of it. With Saadia, that's starting to start too. They're opening up to poetry, but in the beginning they weren't so into poetry. So he quotes 5 of them, all what we now call Palestinian Jews. I mean, some people would not call them Palestinian Jews, but that's a different story. Like these earlier poets, he introduces neologism. So he introduces also new words. We saw that Yanai and Kalir, we saw it a little bit. Introduced new words that they just made up. But Saadia creates new words more in line with the principles of Hebrew grammar, as they were understood in his days. In his, what you see, I'll give you an example. The roots het, resh, resh has to do with freedom, right? Herut means, is from that root. Herut means freedom. But now there is a word, l'shahrer, to let something roam freely. Now, so that is a you do something with the roots, you put a sheen in front, which is an unusual way to do that. The resh now occurs twice instead of herut only once. So you can actually play around. In Hebrew, it happens that sometimes a shir, the word shir is a song. Shorer is somebody who's a singer or somebody who sings. So you have 2 reshes there. Shorer, a shir only had 1. So sometimes you have the 3rd letter occurs double. So there are in Hebrew but he uses that feature much more. He sometimes takes root letters, doubles them. Sometimes you have a nun that comes before, then end that becomes before the root letters, which makes it passive. It's called a nif'al. He sometimes takes such a nun and makes it into another root letter. Like, he does very creative things, but he uses these, let's say, these roots, and he does what Hebrew does in classical Hebrew, but much more than before. And I think Margot has a question.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Shimon. And if you don't finish a thought, because it's never that urgent. But so far, if I recall correctly, we have in no order of importance, we have Shir, Tehillim, Piyut, which basically, as far as I can infer or understand, denote how they're being used? Are there particular names for kinds of poems? You've been very good about addressing structure of the poetry, but does the structure itself have, at their time, contemporaneous to when they were composed, names for their structure that
Yes,
you
yes.
had?
So we already said that what Yanai did was Kedushta, which is a certain poem, a series of poems in a structure that was inserted in the first three. So that's called the Kedushta. Kalir also wrote Kedushtas, but not for the, but just for special Shabbatot and for holidays. So these Palestinian Jews made Kedushtas. That's a
Which are
type.
particular
Tehillim
from-
is refers to the praises in the Bible, in the book of Tehillim, in the
but
Psalms.
they had different within the Tehillim.
Of course, of course, of
They
course.
had
Yeah,
different
yeah, yeah, yeah.
structures that they
Yeah,
used.
yeah. So, but Tehillim, basically, Tehillah means praise. It's a general word for praise. So, if you write something in terms of not any poem, not every poem is praise. Shir means song. Shira is usually meant for a poem, but these words are flexible. Now, there
But
is
they basically were talking about the purpose they were using, other than you saying Kedushta did address the structure.
No,
Because there's
it's
so
type of
much
structure. You had
that you're giving us.
Yotzorot, you had different poems in the early place. It's a bit of a side topic to define them, and I'm not 100% sure if I have a total overview of them. But it is true that these terms are not all the same, right? It's true. So it's
Okay.
they're used with different. That's true. They're used with different ones.
Okay, because you're very particular, and I'm really appreciating you're talking about a structural analysis of the poetry. But I know in English, I don't know in other languages, that a certain way you would compose it would have a name given to it.
No, right, and that might be the case. I don't know these names. I know some of them in Arabic. We're going to go when we talk about Andalusian poetry a bit more. And I think that initially, so we'll go talk about that more. But these are Shira is the general term for poetry.
Right.
Okay, like these.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So here it says. For instance, he would often double a root letter, leave out a weak root letter, etc., etc. So he'd play around with the, and that's how he would make sometimes new words. Now, this is what we did. Oh, scribe. We go to the second part. This of the first line. Kibrat ... ends with tet, but that's only because we know that the rhyme is consistent. Kibrat. People who have translated have said it's a little distance. Now. This comes from Genesis 35:16, kibrat. As far as I know, the only place where this word occurs, and here it says in Hebrew. I should have written down the translation, but I forgot. Vayis omi Beit El. This is Jacob. They left from Beit El. Vahi od kibrat haaretz labo Ephrata. They were on their way to Ephrat, to Bethlehem. And it was still a kibrat of the land. So it could be, there's a bit of a discussion. Does it mean a little distance away from Ephrat or a long distance away from Ephrat? Because there is a word, kabir, in Arabic, kabir means great. There's another example how the same root could mean something else, but related. Kabir in Arabic means great. Allahu Akbar, God is great, right? Kabir, Akbar. But kabir in Hebrew means mighty. So it's very similar, but not exactly the same. So kibrat haaretz could be a mighty long road to go still to Ephrat, or would it be close to Ephrat? And people have said this probably means close to Ephrat, a short distance to Ephrat, because Rachel died during childbirth. Okay, so what Tèlef Rachel, she started to give birth, Rachel. But the kash is from the word kasheh, to hard, belidata, and she had a hard time giving birth. And eventually we know the end of the story. She's going to die and she's going to be buried close to Bethlehem, and therefore we think it probably means a short distance to Ephrat. But if you didn't know that, you would probably think it means a long distance. In any case, Kibrat, that's where we have that's the source. That's where he has this word from. And of course, it has a tav, so he likes a lot of tavs in this strophe because this is about tav. It starts and it ends with a tav, with the letter T. We don't know the second and the third, probably two more words. We don't know the second and the third word. So we don't know a little distance what. How does it continue? So that's a problem with this strophe. It's not complete. So we go to the second line. He is what they figured out there should be. Then there's a word missing. Keforet lefotet. So they translated that. Somebody who has translated, by the way, I have somewhat of a translation, but looking at this, I changed a lot of the translation because I don't think it's always correct and it doesn't always make sense. But this word keforet, this translator translated as like a frost. All right, perhaps. This comes from Exodus 16, verse 14, and I'm actually working on that parasha. So I have a slide, and I just took a copy of the slide. But this is about the giving of the manna in the desert. Batal shichvat hatal. So here, okay, and the dew had gone up. Vihine al pnei hamidbar dak mehuspas. And there was on the face of the wilderness a fine something, dak kak kefor ala aretz. Fine like a kefor on the earth. That's the word kefor. He makes it feminine, keforet. He likes to do that. Saadia often takes a word and makes it feminine. And so many translators translate it as fine as a layer, as a frost on the earth. Possible, but keforet, I was thinking, it's also like kippur, kaporet, which means a cover. And kippur is actually covering up your sins, whatever. So I translated this as a fine cover on the earth. It's a fine layer on the earth. But maybe there's a good reason to translate it as frost. If you have a very little frost and the sun comes out and it melts. So perhaps that's what it means. Keforet lefotet. Here's lefotet. That comes from, he made it up from the root pe tav, pat. Now, currently, pat is often used as a bite, like from pe. Pe is a mouthful is a bite of bread, and pat also means bread. So pat Yisrael is bread that is baked by a Jewish baker. That's what pat Yisrael. But in the Psalms, the word appears, and it doesn't mean bread. I think the word pe, pat, is from later origin in biblical Hebrew. Here in Psalms, mashlich karho chefitim. Here you have the plural of pitim. Lifnei karato mi amod. He, that is God, hurls down his hail like pebbles. Pitim are like pebbles. Who can withstand his icy blast? Now, blast. So if it's frost, then pelting frost would mean hail, right? So pebbles of hail, I think. So may your words be like pelting frost or pelting hail, perhaps. I think that is the translator had crumbling frost, but I have no idea. So, and they said, may their words be like pelting frost. Now, if it's your word or their word, it's not clear. Once again,
I have a problem with
what?
With hail.
Hmm?
Because tal and gives an implication of wait. Are you talking?
There's no word tal here.
No, you're right. I'm sorry, I take that back. Never mind.
Oh, you take it back. Yeah, okay, no problem. Yeah, tal. Yeah, here there is tal.
No, I'll agree with you. Kahoke pitim is probably hail. That's what
I think it's a poetic word of saying hail pelting frost.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but the translator who I
Absolutely.
so then we continue to a third line, also not tahrach, something dot probably yisotet bittekach regen mehotet. Tahrach, I think it means clothing. The translator said weaponry, but I couldn't find anything that would that. There's Exodus 28 here that comes from tahra, and that means a collar. So this is about the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. Ayafi rosho betocho safa yiyeh lefiv saviv maaseh oreg kefi tahra. Lo yikareya. There shall be an opening, an edge around, woven like a collar, so that it will not tear. I think it means here collar, but you also have tahrichim, which is probably from the same root, which is the clothing for the dead. I think tahrach, tahr, the ach is your, so your tahar, your tahra. I don't know if it's connected to tahrich, probably not. But in any case, tahar means a collar. So I would say your clothing he wants to shred, or is shredding your clothing. It's the image that somebody grabs you by the collar, and pulls it and tears it. So you're assaulted basically. That's what I make of it, and it's definitely not an easy poem. Yisotet comes from satat is a stone chiseler. So situt, yisotet is to chisel. So shredding, basically, when you chisel out stone, you actually you crush the stone out. So your clothing wants to, I think, pull out or shred. That's, I think, what it means. We go to the next word of this line. Already the grumble of the aggressor has wounded you. Bittekach regen mehotet. Bitek, from your bitek is bittekach, bittekecha, is cutting, severing, or splitting. He said had pierced you, but that goes a bit far. I think just generally wounded. Regen means grumbling. It's from nirgan, which is complaining or grumbling. And then you have mehotet. He said the slanderer, said the original translator, but I don't find any word that has to do with slandering. I do see here ad ana tehot, tehot tu. How long will you assault me? That's in Psalm 62. So I say the aggressor or the assaultant. So the assaultant has wounded you, and he's trying to tear your clothing apart. This all has to do with probably Ben Asher, who was attacking him. So he's basically saying you got to defend yourself. Weapon yourself with words. We're going to look at the whole strophe after. We're going speeding up a bit. Tebuach, this line, Tebuach, Yeshotet, Laruz, Lelotet, and then something, the last word of the strophe is ta. The translation I have is, your speech, I changed the translation around, your speech shall flow to spray and to moisten. That means this is again the speech, that's the weapons. It shall now flow, and it will moisten the land, it will fertilize the land so that people will that the Jewish community will flourish and not be jeopardized by the attacks of the Karaites. It's in his opinion, the Karaites pose a serious threat. So tebuach would be your speech. Now, there's the word tebuah. Tenuva. Tenuv is a form of tenuva. Now, tenuva means harvest, but that's not what it is. It comes here from niv, which means idiom. And I think it's indirectly also connected to the word navi, somebody who speaks on behalf of God. So your speech, yeshotet, which will flow. Here is your speech shall flow. That is now not from the Bible. That's from a Mishnah. Damo shotet. It's about a person who's who's killed, and they want to know if the blood is pure or is contaminating impurity, bringing impurity or not. And I don't know the discussion, but it says, what if his blood flows out for a quarter or for an eighth? In any case, it's something in the Mishnah. We want to go into the details of the law because it's very far away from me, not too hard to relate to and to understand it. But damoshotet, it means his blood is flowing. So yeshotet is here, flowing, and therefore may your speech flow. Laros is the second word. The next word comes from probably risus, to spray. In modern Hebrew, it's often like spraying of shrapnel of a hand grenades and stuff. But originally, it's just spraying. Could also be spraying water. So may your speech flow and spray all the greenery on the land. Lelotet, what does that mean? To moisten, to make wet. What does that mean? That is from the Talmud. It's an Aramaic word, latat, and it means you washing grain and you stirring the grain around to make it wet for some purpose, maybe for sprouting purposes or maybe just to clean it out. And can you do that before offering your tithing? And discussions about that. But that is a form in Aramaic from the Talmud, and this is a word that a Karaite who's going to read this might have a problem because he doesn't know this vocabulary, probably, unless most likely because it's a Talmudic expression. But he uses this into the Hebrew, and that's been done ever since. Of course, people do use Aramaic into Hebrew up to today. There's a lot of Aramaic words that have penetrated into the Hebrew vocabulary. Now, we went through all the words that are available in this first strophe, and here's the whole strophe as we have it. Here you see the tavs are all in red, so you see the how the rhyme works. So you see the rhyme scheme, and the end, the ta. Arm yourself with weaponry, O scribe. A little distance, something, who knows. May your words, probably, be like a pelting frost. And then ... Your clothing he wants to shred. Already the grumble of the aggressor has wounded you. The grumble was his verbal attack, right? And that has wounded you. Your speech shall flow, spraying and moistening the land, the community, who knows what it is. So this is all we know. Now, luckily, well, first, unlucky. The next strophe starts with an is written. This is all written around the letter tet. The second one is written around aleph, and the third around the letter bet. But aleph and bet are lost. We don't have them. But luckily, from the gimel, we have everything else. Now, I was so afraid last night that I would finish this whole poem and not have enough material. Now, we did only one strophe, and the time is up. So I can actually... What I want to show with this is how Saadia Gaon knows so well to pick without having a concordance or without having looking up on Google text and words. He knows to find terminology and words from everywhere in the Bible, a term, and he uses them in different context. And he takes words from poetry and from Talmud, and he's 23 years old, and he has this all in his head. It is not anywhere he can look up. These things didn't exist yet. So that is...
What a talent.
That is brilliant, and that is amazing.
Unbelievable.
That's amazing. So with your permission, I hope this is not going to be boring, and if not, you just tell me. But I would continue next week. I will try to look up more references from where did he get it from? What is the original context? How does he use it? The next strophes are going to be a bit easier because we don't have, hiatuses in the lines. Of course, it helps if it might be harder if you don't really know how to read Hebrew, but I will do my best to just read it to you. I hope you can benefit from it if you're learning Hebrew. But so you can always contact me and email, say, oh, please, or even after next time, if it goes on too much, can we do something else? I would not be offended. I'm very grateful for feedback. So if this is too dry, too deep, too linguistic, please complain and we'll move on to something else. So, oh, you still like it, David? Yeah?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. So, but it could be that after in strophe 20, you say, now I had enough. And I think I would probably agree with that. We're not going to do the whole thing. My goal is to go to some extent through this whole poem, not as deeply perhaps. And then there is, as a response to this, there was a Karaite who wrote a poem against Saadia Gaon. And I want to look at that one too. I haven't found the Hebrew original. I have a translation. Hopefully in the meantime, I'll find the Hebrew original, which makes it a bit interesting. We're not going through that whole rigmarole, but just know what his arguments are against Saadia Gaon. Because now we have here poetry, not just linguistically juicy, but also as a polemic, as a way to like verbal fencing in a way. Yeah. So I hope this was interesting. Yes, you liked it too, Margot. So thank you so much. I see saw a few thumbs. So that is very, that's very, how do you say, encouraging to me, because I never know before I teach something if it's really interesting. But I don't think I was too far off. I like it myself too. So we'll continue at least one more class on this poem. This proposed 10 classes is already seems to be growing to a longer course. At a certain point, I have to go. In June, I will be going to, by the way, so on another note, but related, in June, I have to go to Holland. I can teach from there because in Holland, it will be 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But 2 Sundays in a row, I have a lecture planned. So we have to skip a few. Then I have 2 more Sundays that I can teach in Holland. Then we go to Africa, to Uganda. And then that will be very hard to teach from there. So we'll see how
long
it goes.
will you be in Uganda for?
What?
How long?
A few weeks. Then I come back. Then I go hiking with my son and grandson for a week in the Alps in Italy. So that'll be a lot of fun. But also, I don't know if there's going to be Sunday available, but maybe they are. We'll play it by ear. And if not, at the end of the summer or after, we'll continue until all my ammunition is finished. Telóf, Tèlef. Take more ammunition. That's how this poem started. So to end with that, thank you so much for your attention. I will work on the video, and thank you so much for signing in every week. And this is turning into becoming a very loyal group of lovers of poetry. Okay, lovely so much.
It's great.
Have a wonderful week, everybody.